Aquarius. There's a feeling, something a little unfamiliar, not clearly defined, yet deep enough for you to know. It's there. It's not something big, not a story you feel the need to tell. Just a quiet echo, left behind from something that has already passed. You keep living your life. You talk, you smile, you move forward as usual. But somewhere inside, something has begun to shift. Not in a sudden way, more like a quiet realization that you're no longer seeing things the way you used to. And what's interesting is, this feeling isn't holding you back. It's not pulling you into the past. It's not asking you to understand it. It simply exists, like a very subtle sign that maybe your direction is changing. And if you stay with it long enough, if you really listen, you may begin to notice the thing you thought you couldn't quite name might actually be the very thing quietly guiding you forward. There are moments in life when everything seems to be moving as usual, but inside, something doesn't feel quite the same. You wake up, go through familiar routines, have the same kinds of conversations, and yet, there's a small space within you that no longer feels like it used to. It's not exactly sadness, not a memory strong enough to name, just a feeling, as if something has brushed against you and left behind a very subtle trace. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't try to stand out, but if you stay still long enough, you begin to notice it's still there, like the echo of a song that has already ended. Yet the melody lingers softly in your mind, and maybe what feels most confusing is not how strong the feeling is, but the fact that you can't explain it. You've always thought of yourself as someone who understands your emotions. Aquarius doesn't easily get lost in things that feel unclear. You like to understand, to see things in ways that make sense. But this time, it's different. You can't give it a clear name. You can't say exactly what it is. It's just a quiet presence, but real enough that you can't ignore it. And strangely, it doesn't make you weaker. If anything, it draws you closer to yourself. You begin to notice the smallest thoughts, the quiet responses of your heart to things that once felt insignificant. Maybe it's a passing glance, a simple sentence, or a moment of silence when you're alone. And in those moments, you start to realize something is changing, not in a way others can easily see, not something that needs to be explained, but something deeper, moving quietly within you. Like a season inside you is closing, yet the next one hasn't fully begun. You just know you're no longer standing where you used to be. And maybe this isn't here to make you go back and search for answers. It's not asking you to figure everything out. It's simply here to remind you that some things in life don't come to be named. They come to be felt, to help you pause, slow down, and listen to yourself more clearly. Because sometimes it's these undefined feelings that quietly become the beginning of a completely different direction. Have you ever sat with yourself, trying to find a clear answer? What is this? Why is it still here? You go back through old memories, connecting the smallest details, a glance, a sentence, a moment that seemed long gone. And then you wonder, why do such small things find their way back, so quietly, yet so persistently? You're not holding on to it. You're not calling it back. And yet, it still shows up in the most unexpected moments, while you're driving alone on a familiar road, while a song plays and somehow hits the exact feeling, or in a quiet evening, when everything around you has finally slowed down. And in those moments, you begin to realize maybe not every feeling is meant to be understood, because the more you try to name it, the more distant it seems to become, as if this feeling doesn't belong to logic. It doesn't live in the space where things can be analyzed or explained. It's more like a soft breeze. You can't hold on to it, but you know you felt it. And then, something very subtle begins to shift. You slowly stop searching for answers, not because you've given up, but because you begin to understand not everything needs to be explained to have meaning. Some feelings are enough just by being there, like listening to an instrumental piece of music. You don't know the story behind it. You don't know who it was written for. You don't even know exactly what it's trying to say. And yet, somehow, it still reaches you in a way that's entirely your own. And maybe what you're feeling right now is something like that. It doesn't need clarity to be real. It doesn't need definition to matter. It simply becomes a part of your journey, a very gentle point of contact, but enough to make you pause and see things differently. And maybe, by no longer trying to fully understand it, you're actually beginning to understand yourself more deeply than before. And then, when you stop trying to name that feeling, something else begins to reveal itself. It's not just something passing through. It feels more like a connection, but not the kind you've known before. There are no intense moments, no words that make your heart race, nothing big enough to make you stop and think for a long time. Everything happens very gently, so gently that if you're not paying attention, you might miss it. Maybe it's just a brief moment when your eyes meet. Not long, but enough to leave behind a feeling you can't quite explain. Or a simple sentence. Nothing special in meaning, but the way it was said stays with you. And then you wonder, why that? Why not something clearer, something stronger? But instead, these small, quiet moments that remain. Maybe it's because real connections don't always need to be loud. Some things reach you in the softest way. They don't disrupt your life. They don't force you to change right away. And yet somehow, they find a place within you. They stay, without a reason, without an explanation. They simply exist. And what's interesting is, this connection doesn't make you feel tied down. It doesn't pull you toward it. It doesn't ask anything from you. It just becomes a very natural part of your emotional flow. Like walking into a room and feeling a certain kind of warmth, but not being able to explain what created it. You just know you want to stay a little longer. And maybe that's exactly what's happening inside you right now. It's not a story that needs a beginning or an ending, not something you need to achieve, just a very gentle point of contact in your journey, a presence that doesn't take over you, but doesn't disappear either. And when you look back, you may begin to see it's these kinds of connections that quietly change how you experience the world. They make you a little more aware, a little more attentive, and maybe a little more open to things that don't need to be fully defined. Because not everything meaningful needs to be spoken. Not every connection needs a name. Some things, simply being what they are, is already enough to touch something very deep within you. And then, when you allow everything to simply exist, something else begins to unfold. That feeling doesn't pull you back into what's already past. It doesn't ask you to return to where you once were. It doesn't keep you stuck in what used to be. Instead, it gently moves you forward, very softly, very slowly, so slowly that sometimes you only notice the change when you look back at yourself. You begin to see things a little differently. The things that once weighed on you don't take up the same space anymore. The choices you once hesitated over start to feel clearer in a quiet, unexpected way. Not because you suddenly have all the answers, but because you no longer need so many answers. And maybe that's the real shift. You stop forcing yourself to understand everything right away. You stop searching for a fixed meaning behind every feeling. Instead, you begin to listen. You listen to how you respond. You notice what brings you a sense of ease and what no longer feels aligned. You choose to stay with what feels true, and gently, you step away from what doesn't. No explanation needed. No need to prove anything. Just a very natural choice. And what's interesting is, this shift doesn't come from the outside. It's not because someone entered your life, not because of a major event. It comes from you, from the way you begin to understand yourself a little more, accept yourself a little more, and allow yourself to change without asking for permission. Maybe you once believed that change had to be obvious, strong, clear, easy to recognize. But now, you're experiencing something different, a deeper movement, unspoken, unrushed, like a current of water quietly shifting direction, without noise, yet still creating an entirely new path. And in that moment, you begin to understand. This isn't loss. You're not losing anything. You're simply stepping out of an older version of yourself and moving closer to another one that feels more aligned with who you are now. A version that doesn't need to try so hard, doesn't need to explain so much, just exists as you are, in a way that feels more honest. And maybe This is exactly where that first feeling has been quietly guiding you all along. And then, after all those quiet movements within you, you begin to notice a different kind of feeling. Lighter, more open, as if you no longer have to hold on so tightly just to feel at peace. Before, you might have believed if something truly mattered, you had to keep it. Hold it through memory, hold it by going back, or at least keep it somewhere deep inside, just to make sure it wouldn't completely disappear. But over time, something shifts. You begin to see it differently. Some things, the more tightly you try to hold them, the more distant they become, not because they've lost their meaning, but because they were never meant to be held that way. It's like trying to catch the wind in your hands. The tighter you grip, the faster it slips away. But if you let your hands stay open, you can still feel it, just in a softer way. And maybe what's changing in you right now is how you see connection. You no longer feel the need to hold on to something just to prove that it mattered, because the meaning of a connection isn't measured by how long it lasts. It's felt in how deeply it touched you. There are moments that don't last very long, encounters that seem small at first. But somehow, they change something within you, the way you think, the way you feel, the way you see the world, and yourself. And once that shift happens, it doesn't need to stay forever to be meaningful. It has already done what it came to do. No clear ending needed, no explanation required, just a very gentle pause in your journey. And what's interesting is, when you begin to accept that, you don't feel like you've lost something. There's no emptiness, no lingering sense of regret, just a quiet understanding that some things are meant to change you, not to belong to you forever. And that isn't something to be sad about. If anything, it brings a different kind of freedom. Freedom from having to hold on. Freedom from having to define everything. Freedom to let each experience come and go in its own natural way. And in that gentle release, you begin to feel fuller, not because you have more, but because you're no longer holding on to what doesn't need to be held. A new space begins to open, not to be filled right away, but to give you room to breathe more easily, to move a little slower, to feel a little deeper, and to trust that what truly belongs with you doesn't need to be held tightly. It will still find a way to stay. And when you're no longer holding on the way you used to, something quietly begins to shift, not in a loud way, not a turning point everyone can clearly see. Just the space around you feels a little wider. You breathe a little easier. You think a little lighter. And the things that once made you feel restricted don't reach you in the same way anymore. Not because they've disappeared, they're still there. But you have changed. You're no longer standing in the same place looking at them the way you did before. And somehow, that small shift changes everything. You begin to notice other directions, choices you might not have even considered before. Not because you weren't capable, but because you once believed there was only one way, one path to follow, one way to hold on, one way to understand. But now, those lines begin to soften. You start to realize you can choose differently. You can move more slowly, or turn toward a direction that doesn't match your original plan. You can let something go, even if it once mattered deeply, and you can open yourself to something new, without needing complete certainty. Not because you've become reckless, but because you've become a little less afraid. Afraid of losing, afraid of change. Afraid of not being in control. Those fears, they don't fully disappear, but they no longer decide everything for you. And in that space that's just opened up, life begins to offer you new possibilities. Maybe it's an opportunity you once overlooked, a path that you never imagined before, or simply a different way of living, one that feels more aligned with who you are now. Nothing dramatic, nothing guaranteed, just you begin to see more. And maybe what matters most isn't which path you choose, but that you realize you've always had a choice, not just one, not just two, but more than you once believed. And when you begin to understand that, you no longer feel stuck. You no longer stay just because you can't see another way. Because now, the path isn't only in front of you, it's opening from within you, from the way you see things. the way you let go, and the way you allow yourself to move in a different direction. Even if it's subtle, it still feels completely real. And then, as your options begin to open up, you start to notice something different. Not every decision you make now comes from thinking. It's not that you've analyzed everything, not that you've weighed every possibility, and yet, somehow, you still know where to go. A very subtle feeling, not strong enough to call it certainty, but not so vague that you can ignore it. It's like standing at a crossroads, with no clear signs, and still, something inside you leans gently in one direction. You can't explain it. There's no clear reason, it's just there. And what's interesting is, you begin to trust it a little more. Not because you've become less rational. Aquarius is still Aquarius. You still think. You still observe. You still see things with enough distance to understand. But this time, you don't need everything to be perfect before you move forward. You don't need all the answers to feel at ease, because something else is beginning to emerge. Lighter than thought, slower than logic, yet somehow deeper. It's intuition. It doesn't speak loudly. It doesn't push. It doesn't try to convince you. It simply stays, like a quiet current beneath every decision you make. You can ignore it, but if you listen, you begin to notice. It's always there, consistent in its own way. Never rushed, never panicked, just a soft inner sense. This way feels right. And maybe there was a time you doubted that. You wondered, am I just imagining this? Can I really trust this feeling? But now, after everything you've been through, you begin to understand. Intuition doesn't have to be perfect to have value. It's not here to predict the future, not here to guarantee outcomes. It's simply a very natural way for you to reconnect with yourself, with what you've lived through, what you've learned, and even what you still can't quite name. It's like a compass, not something that tells you exactly where you'll end up, but something that helps you not feel completely lost in the middle of your choices. And as you begin to trust that feeling, even just a little, you realize you don't have to force yourself to be certain about everything anymore. You can keep moving without knowing the entire path ahead. You can choose without having to prove that your choice is right. It's simply what feels aligned for you right now. And that is enough. Because sometimes the right path isn't the clearest one. It's the one that makes you feel a little more honest, a little more yourself. And maybe that's how intuition speaks, not loudly, not forcefully, just a very soft whisper, but enough for you to hear it when you're finally ready to listen. And then, after everything you've moved through, maybe the most important thing isn't how much you've figured out, but that you allowed yourself to feel without rushing to explain it. You don't need to name this feeling. You don't need to define what it is or who it belongs to. You don't even need to know where it's leading you, because not every journey begins with clarity. Some paths only reveal themselves when you're willing to move slowly enough, and some feelings only begin to make sense when you stop trying to control them. You can let it be there. As a natural part of your experience, no need to hold on tightly, no need to push it away. Just accept that it showed up, and in its own quiet way, it touched something within you. Maybe it made you pause. Maybe it shifted how you think. Maybe it helped you see yourself from an angle you hadn't noticed before. And that might already be enough. You don't need a clear ending for something to feel complete. You don't need a perfect answer for a feeling to matter. Because sometimes, the things you can't quite name are the ones that change you the most. Not loud, not obvious, but enough for you to realize you've changed. A little lighter, when you're no longer carrying so much. A little clearer, when you begin to listen to yourself. And a little freer, when you no longer need to understand everything before allowing yourself to keep moving forward. And if there's anything you take with you from this journey, maybe it's not an answer, maybe it's a feeling that you can trust your own rhythm, trust those quiet signals you once overlooked, and trust that things don't have to be clear from the very beginning to still guide you somewhere that fits you better. And maybe, somewhere in this story, you saw a part of yourself, or maybe you didn't. And that's completely okay, because every journey has its own pace. Every feeling arrives in its own way. No need to be like anyone else. No need to be right or wrong, as long as you're still listening. and still moving in your own way. And if today things don't feel completely clear, maybe that's not a sign to stop. Maybe it's just a quiet reminder that you're in the middle of a shift that doesn't always need to be named. And maybe, within those quiet spaces, another version of you is slowly taking shape.